Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. You're watching The Brown Feminist. I am back after a brief winter holiday to bring you career-related content once again about the field of clinical research. In today's episode, we will be answering one very important question that we have been frequently asked, and that is whether or not clinical research jobs can be remote or are they all in person? So, cutting to the chase just now, no, they are not all remote, they are not all in person. There is a very good balance, lots of options to choose from. From my very personal experience, in the Canadian job market, it has been so that I've seen 60 to 65% of jobs being in person and the rest being more remote. Now, we're going to be talking about this a lot more in detail to help you understand where to find those remote positions or where to find those in-person positions, which ones are more available, how to know which one is right for you, and how to be the more competitive candidate for each kind of job. So before we do anything else, let's get started. Now, whether or not a clinical research position will be remote or in person depends on a couple of different factors, namely three. Number one is the type of role and responsibility. Number two is the level of role within the organization, like the hierarchy, level 1, 2, 3, or more senior roles. Number three is the type of organization where the clinical research is being conducted. So one by one, let's look into it. So first of all, let's talk about your level of responsibility within the organization. Now, as you know, clinical research can have lots of different hierarchical positions, and more responsibility comes with more senior roles. Now, in a more junior position like a research assistant, clinical research assistant level 1, 2, and 3, there are more remote roles available compared to slightly more senior roles like clinical research associate, clinical research coordinator. So that also kind of depends on how much of remote positions you are going to find available in the market based on kind of whether you're applying at an entry level, a mid to senior level, or a senior level. Now, it's more so I've found from my personal kind of market survey that the clinical research associates and coordinators have a very hands-on role, while very senior positions such as a project manager, trial manager who looks after multiple sites might actually, again, go back down to having less hands-on work and more virtual work or more remote roles available to them. So it's really the mid to senior hierarchy where I found that a lot more hands-on work needs to be done. There's a lot more accountability needed for on-site presence, or a lot more recruitment of participants, engaging with trial participants, especially if you have more of a clinical role to play there. So that brings us to number two, which is the kind of role or responsibility, the job description that you have within the organization. Now, you know, there can be a lot of different types of clinical research roles. For example, a role such as a clinical data manager. That role is more likely to be available to you as remote, virtual, from home. Why? Because that role has a lot more to do with managing once patient's data has been collected, and then managing the screening, the security, the storage, the analysis of that massive level of health data of these individuals. And a lot of that has to do with using various softwares, making sure to kind of limit access, making sure it's stored in a safe place within organizational servers, making sure that people are being able to enter the data properly, various arrays from various sites, or people are being able to kind of request the data from here to do their analysis, to, come up with different kind of data findings, or prepare manuscripts and prepare other grand presentations. So they're kind of in charge of they're kind of like the managers of all the data. So So these kind of roles are more likely to be available to you more remotely, more virtually. So if that's an aspect of clinical research that you want to specialize in, it's really great to start thinking about, okay, I want more work-life balance. I want something that's remote. I want to live in a city which is not necessarily in the same city as where the project is happening. In that case, learning software tools and going more towards clinical data management or analysis is the way to go. On the other hand, there are roles such as research nurse or research nurse coordinator of clinical trials. So these roles are obviously a lot more hands-on, especially from my experience. I've seen that whenever they're hiring somebody with a clinical background, a clinical license, such as an RN, it's much more likely that they would want you in person at least part of the time. So even when there were lots of lockdowns, I've known of clinical nurse coordinators going in at least a few days a week, right? Because they were hired for their clinical skills, for their ability to engage with patients in a certain way, for their ability to kind of recruit and consent and answer patients' questions and kind of do assessments and all of these things, it's much more likely that these roles would require you to be more in person at least a part of the time. As such, they might need you to be at least in the same city, and so on. Then the other thing to consider is that a lot of roles might say remote for majority of the time, but if it is multi-site, sometimes they need you to actually travel to those sites. So it's really important to kind of keep an eye on these kind of terms. For example, remote but central clinical research coordinators can be hired to kind of look at multiple sites, right? So when you're looking at multiple sites, some organizations I've seen, in fact, quite a few of them in Ontario and Quebec in Canada, I've seen that they actually need you to have a driving license and to be able to drive to various site locations throughout the month. Of course, not every day, but you would probably still be looking at a hybrid lifestyle where you are home part of the week, and then on 1 or 2 days of the week, you are driving off to one site this week and another site another week. So you're kind of the central research coordinator for many different sites. So simply looking at a multi-site remote position might not guarantee that it will be fully virtual. So it is important to kind of look for those keywords whenever you're applying to a position to know what you are signing up for. Now, having said that, the third point is very important as well, and that is what kind of a research organization you are working with. Now, I have seen a lot more CROs, which is like contract research organizations. Sometimes they're called CCROs, clinical contract research organizations, which are basically it can be any organization. It can be like a clinic or it can be like a hospital branch, but essentially they're on contract from another company, which is sometimes it's like a drug company, a pharma company, and they're by contract, they're kind of implementing a research protocol on their site. And so these are called CCROs. So these organizations have multiple clients and they're running multiple research trials on site, and a lot of them are from various different pharma companies and other kind of sponsor companies that we call them. So in these kind of instances, I have seen that there is some in-person requirement to be there, especially for multi-site. Like I was telling you, I've seen a lot of CCROs hire clinical research coordinators to take care of at least a couple of different sites within a region. Of course, they're not gonna be making you like fly all over the world. I haven't really seen that, but within your state, within your province, within like I guess like 100-kilometer, 200-kilometer radius, they might expect you to kind of drive around and go to their various different clinical trial sites because they have been recruiting from various different locations. And so there will be travel involved, and I know that might not be ideal for a lot of people. On the other hand, if you look at more academic research organizations, I have seen that the in-person component is a lot less. I've seen a lot more virtual positions in academic research organizations. Now, having said that, once again, you have to think of the level of work needed. Currently, I am also working for an academic research organization, and I'm the only person in the whole team who needs to go in, and that too for just a few days a week, because there are some components that just has to be done by hand. There's some sample collections and zip shipments, some patient interaction that has to be done by hand. But except for that, I've seen majority of people, especially when due to COVID there were lockdowns or there was a recommendation of not going into campus as much, it was super easy for the team to just move their work virtually. So I feel that depending on their circumstances, academic research institutes are more readily able to move things remotely. Although that's not something they might want in the long run. So you'll have to think of how long you want to stay on here and how long you want it to be virtual. For academic research institutes, it might actually flip back once full-fledged on-campus things come back, maybe in a year. You might be, no longer able to stay remote. But in terms of the capacity to go remote, usually the kind of work that they do academically has a lot more flexibility in hours, as well as a lot more flexibility in doing a chunk of the work from home. Now then, coming to like hospital research organizations, again, as you can understand, there's usually patient interactions involved. Sometimes you have to use certain softwares like patient care kind of, CRMs, which you have to be on campus to do. These aren't softwares that you can find commercially available and downloadable to your home computer or, your home setting. So because you might be handling a lot more of sensitive patient data, it's much more likely that you will find fewer remote roles and more in-person roles. Now, of course, with COVID, everything has been flipping back and forth, but largely I've seen that depending on the type of organization as well, you can kind of predict whether there are more remote roles available versus there are more in-person roles available. So that's about it for today. So let's do a quick sum up of what we've learned here. So first of all, we talked about the level of role that you have in the organization, and typically entry levels can be more remote, but mid to senior level roles like associates and coordinators are more likely to need a lot of involvement, a lot of responsibility and in-person availability on site. And then again, very peak, like the project managers and PIs once again can choose to be remote as well, although I do see them coming in at least part of the time. The second thing we learned today is about the kind of work description you have, what role you play within the clinical research team. For example, are you a clinical data manager, or are you a clinical nurse coordinator, or what exactly is your role here? Are you kind of like an ethics and grants applicant? Are you kind of like just a trial monitor? So depending on the role, there's also some roles which are more likely to be in person and some roles which are more likely to be virtual during COVID or even in the long term. And the third thing we learned today is that the type of research organization can also influence the kind of roles that will be available to you. For example, contract clinical research organizations or pharma companies which are recruiting clinical research roles might have lots of different locations in a region from where they recruit. As a result, it might be called a remote central position with some travel required or not required. So that's something to look into. Academic research organizations are more likely to be able to easily shift to virtual or shift to remote for longer periods of time, but they may shift back depending on like campus and faculty kind of rules and restrictions around COVID or not, but a lot of them will need less hands-on information, whereas hospital research positions are much more likely to need you on site, whether it is to interact with patients or even to handle sensitive health information, which might only be available on server using their kind of softwares and computers and such. So this was it, a very general overview of where you can find clinical remote research roles and in-person research roles. But I do want to end this with a very important tip that I had to learn the hard way. There is a lot more competition when it comes to clinical remote roles right now. A lot of people after COVID have figured out that they enjoy being home, they enjoy the work-life balance, they enjoy kind of being available throughout the day a little bit for their kids or their other personal engagements, and so they like the flexibility of remote roles, which means a lot more people are now fighting for that 40-45% of positions which is remote. And that means that if you're looking for work, if you are in the same city, or you're willing to move to the same city and you're willing to go in, you are a lot more likely to get an in-person role more easily with less competition compared to a remote role. I myself happily volunteered to move to the city of Montreal because the role required me to go in person at least a few days a week. And I wanted to be the candidate which said, sure. I wanted to be among the candidates which said, yes, I'll be able to go in, I'll be able to work virtually, I'll be able to move to that city, which made me a more attractive candidate for the role. Now, I know it's not possible for everybody at every phase of life to just kind of uproot yourself and move. But if you are in a position where maybe you don't have a family yet, you haven't bought a house yet, you're not really tied down to where you are, then moving around in the early phase of your career can really help a lot. And you can leave kind of the remote roles for when you have a little bit more experience and you're a little bit more of an attractive candidate on your resume. So that's it for today. I hope that this has been a helpful little talk for all of you. Please feel free to ask me any more questions you have about clinical research, and I will do my best to answer them. Until next time, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, please. And if you enjoy my video and want to see more of this type, don't forget to subscribe. And that's the Brown Feminist. Bye.